Welcome to the WorkLife Wellbeing podcast. Digital financial advisor Open Money launched their low-cost employee benefit solution, WorkLife, to help employers put their employees first by enabling them to offer financial advice, tools, and support through the workplace. Not stopping there, WorkLife by Open Money expanded their offering to include a broad range of benefits to support their employees' overall well-being that might usually be out of reach for many businesses. My name's Leah Heath, and I'm your host for this podcast. Over this 6-part series, I am going to be joined by special guests to discuss all areas of well-being. Today, we're discussing mental well-being. Hi everyone, and welcome to the final episode of this series of the WorkLife Wellbeing podcast. As ever, I am your host, and my name is Leah Heath. This week, we are going to be discussing mental well-being with our special guest, Sarah Singleton. Sarah works at Thrive, an organisation that WorkLife work very closely with. Thrive are the creators of an NHS-approved mental well-being app that is available to workplaces as part of their wellbeing and benefits solution. Sarah is a senior relationship manager for the company, meaning that her job is to help the delivery of Thrive within workplaces, ensure there is good engagement, and champion the provision of mental well-being in all sorts of organisations. So, hi Sarah, how are you today?
Hi Leah, yeah, really good, thanks. Fantastic intro there. I think you covered off quite nicely what we do, and yeah, really looking forward to having a bit of a chat about mental well-being. Really, it's one of our most favourite subjects to talk about, and really excited to be here. Thanks.
Well, that's good news. I hope I've not covered off too much and you've still got something to actually say. But as you know, we have got you on today to talk about mental wellbeing, as you just said. We're going to focus specifically on mental wellbeing in our organisation. So something that you're quite familiar with, an expert, if you will. We want to know sort of how to look after it and what we could actually do better. So if we just kick off straight away, I'm going to go in with a bit of a hard one. Responsibility is a word that is thrown around a lot, I think, in workplaces. But do you think it is a responsibility for an organisation to check in with the mental well-being of its members? And we're not just talking workplaces, I'm talking sports teams, etc., anything like that. What do you reckon?
Yeah, really good question to start with, to be honest. And it fosters straight away a lot of different aspects of what mental well-being is and who we're talking about when we say organisations and mental well-being. Yeah, really good question to start with. And I think the easiest answer is absolutely. If we think about, like you say, from an organisational perspective, we're not just talking about employees, we're talking about students, volunteers, victims of crime, people that are, currently struggling with mental health issues, as well as people that are really well. It's absolutely everybody. And in terms of where we spend the majority of our time, it is at work or it is at school. So is it a good idea and is it the responsibility of an organisation to check in? Absolutely, I think it is. The main reasons that it is a good idea and it is so important is because it helps us identify stressors. If we know what people are struggling with, we can then target interventions to support them. It helps build a positive culture around mental well-being as well. Generally making that part of the conversation builds a positive environment for people to talk about their mental well-being in a positive way, as well as when they're struggling and seeking a bit of support. And it does remind people of the support that's available and encourages that peer-to-peer support as well, because ultimately, we know that there are loads of support services available to look after our mental well-being, but nothing replaces the support of just talking to another human, whether that's a colleague or a friend or a family member. So yeah, absolutely. In short, it's definitely a good idea and hopefully something we're going to see more of as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I would agree as well. Working in wellbeing, I don't think you can disagree with that. I mean, you gave some great examples there, like people who were victims of crime. I'd never even thought of that, to be honest. But how do you feel about workplaces as a specific place to give this help and assistance with mental well-being?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the amount of the UK population that are in work, that's the vast majority of adults, isn't it? So if, the workplace becomes a really important place to start checking in with mental well-being, If we're thinking about those who are key stakeholders in employee wellbeing, so that would be your human resources team, maybe you've got people and culture, head of wellbeing, learning and development. Knowing what staff are struggling with or coming up against really helps focus that attention. So where do we need to support with training and so on? But it also helps identify those that are struggling and when they are struggling, so we can get that early. So if we're thinking about this from an absence perspective, if we can prevent and detect early when an individual is struggling with a mental health issue or before it gets to that point, we can put the necessary steps in place to support them and hopefully prevent an absence from work, or at least ensure that we're getting someone back to work sooner and they're in a really good place to be at work as well. So yeah, in mental wellbeing in the workplace, as we can see over even just the last 2 years, it's become one of those top priorities, as it really should be.
And well, my next question was, why do you think this? But I guess the answer to that, as you explained, was as a preventative measure. Because I guess the implications of not doing exactly what you've just said is possibly that by the time it gets too late, the preventative methods might not be as useful as they would have been beforehand. I'm just wondering though, are there any implications of putting preventative measures into workplaces?
I really don't think so. I mean, if we start straight away by talking about, well, what is mental health, and thinking of our mental health just as we would our physical health, and actually it's not the absence of being healthy, but it's being healthy in itself. So just like we would go to the gym or walk the dog or maybe chuck up a rocker in your drink in the morning, other brands are available, and we do all these things to look after our physical health. Bringing conversations about mental well-being and generally preventative solutions into the workplace will actually get us in a position where it becomes routine, it's part of well-being, and we're preventing people getting ill, which, like you said, we're preventing people going off with absences, we're preventing things like presenteeism and people being in the workplace when really we could be getting a bit more out of them if we got them to a place where they're healthier again and then brought them back in. And a lot of the caution, I guess, around bringing preventative mental health support into the workplace comes from that stigma of, well, if we start having conversations around mental health, does that mean I'm going to be talking to people about OCD? Does it mean someone will be coming to me saying that they're having suicidal thoughts? And actually, when we talk about general mental well-being, it's more about normalising things such as, how are you feeling today, mate? Oh, well, I'm feeling a bit meh, actually, and I didn't really sleep that well. And then having conversations about how that's made us feel and what situations were at play that meant that we didn't get a good night's sleep or that we're now feeling demotivated or low in energy. And it's just generally our mental well-being. There's loads of things that we can do about that. It doesn't have to be these big, scary, complex conversations around your mental health. Just like you don't have to be a personal trainer to talk to someone about, oh, I've got a bit of a bad back and it's really getting to me. You don't have to be a counsellor to have conversations with someone about, I'm just not feeling great today. But the benefits of having those conversations means that we start building this self-awareness. So people become more aware of situations and circumstances that negatively impact their own well-being, or things that they can do to positively impact somebody else's well-being, and generally be more aware of our mental well-being, but also to start building resilience to stress and coping mechanisms, and all that can start in the workplace. And it just starts with openness, really, having a conversation as simple as, well, how are you today? And how really are you? How are things at home? And how are you feeling? Are you sleeping well? We don't all have to be mental health practitioners to start bringing a positive culture around mental well-being into the workplace. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does. I feel like the provision for mental well-being and the fear of how people might not engage with it is two-pronged, particularly for smaller businesses who might not have the big HR departments or the big people teams. I guess if you've got one person running a team of 4, let's say, I guess there's the fear of responsibility. So how on earth am I going to lead this? And then within businesses where there might not be a great culture, sort of thinking, well, am I going to get judged by my employer if I have to say this? And I guess what Thrive does is it cuts out those problems that might arise. So what do you think regarding the fear of responsibility and stigma and culture within workplaces?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially when actually we're talking about tens of millions of people in the UK that work for small businesses or micro businesses, or they're self-employed. And like you say, if you don't have a robust HR team or a wellbeing department or a team of mental health first aiders, then how do you start having those conversations around mental wellbeing, and how do you start bringing that into conversation? And we talk a lot about culture and a culture for well-being, or a positive psychological culture in the workplace. But actually, every business has a culture and it all looks very differently. And the best place to start with bringing those things in is to start look at, well, what works? How do we communicate internally? How do we have, or where are our regular touch points as a business? Do we have team meetings? Do we send out a lot of communication via email, or are we face to face? And using these as the first opportunity to start looking at how we work together and how we support each other. And like you say, from an individual perspective, having Thrive in place means that we're not putting the responsibility on individuals to start knowing how to navigate mental health. We're putting a tool in place there that teaches them a lot of tools and techniques to look after their mental well-being, but positioning it as a tool for the 4 in 4. So you don't have to be one of the 1 in 4 that's currently struggling with a mental health issue. You can actually be feeling quite well. And mental health and mental well-being isn't just something for people that are struggling to access. It's for absolutely everybody, because it can start building that into your day-to-day, and it can start having a positive impact in the workplace straight away. So even just seeing, well, what are people using to look after their mental well-being? What sort of support services do we have for the team? And do people know it's there, what it's there for, how they can use it, how they can practically apply it to their day-to-day? Can make a massive difference straight away into culture, and start bringing a culture of well-being into the workplace.
Yeah.
Because it does sound like a big take on, doesn't it? To then start, really taking responsibility for well-being in the workplace. But it doesn't need to be meaning that you put a team of mental health first aiders in place. It can be something quite as simple as, are there support services there for our staff? Do people know how to access it? And then do we start having those conversations, those really general, relaxed, almost water cooler talks with people on a day-to-day basis?
The whole fear of responsibility brings the element of choice. Someone I know very well was actually asked not so long ago to become a mental health first aider. And he said to his manager, he was like, thank you for thinking of me, but I really don't think I could take that on. And I mean, it's an absolutely brilliant thing for people who do want to take that on and do feel passionate. But if it's something that you personally would not like the responsibility of, so how do you feel choice fits into whether to engage or not in mental wellbeing initiatives?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, that, actually. And I want to say yes or no as to whether, sort of choice on how we bring this in is important. I mean, ultimately, we want people to have autonomy, especially when it comes to well-being, to feel that we're not forcing anybody down a certain route at all, and giving individuals the power to look after their own well-being. But at the same time, engaging with wellbeing services and having sort of preventative and early detection tools in place is really important. And I think, again, it comes from looking at, well, what's going to work for our company, what's going to work for our people, and what works for a specific individual. So having a team of mental health first aiders, or becoming a mental health first aider, may not be appropriate for every business, may not be something that people want to take on. But what could be done instead is, well, how can we champion positive conversations around wellbeing internally? And it can be something as simple as reminding people of the support that's there, and leave it at that. We don't have to put specific responsibility on any specific individuals, but just giving them the choice as to where they get that support, how they can access it, that there is privacy and confidentiality there, as well as there is someone for me to speak to internally, just as a friend, if I want to. And ultimately, I've got a choice in what my mental well-being or general well-being looks like. So I've got the ability to quite openly have conversations with my colleagues, with management, or I can quite privately access some support to look after my own mental well-being or skill myself up so I can talk about someone else. So yeah, it's really important. That choice and that autonomy is incredibly important. But the choice as to whether or not mental well-being support should be there, I don't think it's a question. There really should be mental wellbeing support available, whatever that looks like for every business, so that support's there to help people to just generally look after their wellbeing, not just when things are a little bit tough.
Well, with workplaces, you've always had things such as high street discounts or DSE, musculoskeletal things, and I dare say at the moment mental well-being and financial well-being are a bit trendy. It sounds horrible, but I really do hope that this is something that's not just going to be around because of the pandemic, because we've not just suddenly gained mental health. It's something that's been around for a long time. How do you reckon the best ways are to engage people within organisations? Because if it's that important and these tools are going to be there, how do you get people to listen?
I think you've raised such a good point there. And funnily enough, I actually had the same conversation with my dad last week, who knows I work in mental wellbeing, and said, yeah, well, it's just a bit trendy, isn't it, at the moment? And actually, you could argue it is, depending on what you look like, but it's potentially it's on trend to drive a Tesla, but being sustainable and more economic isn't on trend. It's something that's really important. And it might be trendy to get a life coach, but looking after your well-being is less of a trend, and it's more that something that it's really important. And I think the pandemic has, if anything, as positive has come out of it, it's really shone a spotlight on the importance of looking after our mental well-being. Because as soon as you remove those things like social interactions, fresh air and a bit of autonomy around getting out and about and doing things for ourselves, we start quite quickly noticing how that negatively impacts our well-being. So it's given this new platform, or like you say, we could stand on our soapboxes quite confidently now and say mental well-being is so important. So then, to answer your question, how do we provide that, and how can we do that better within organisations? And like we say, it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be bringing in psychological professionals or putting your staff through intense mental health first aid courses, essentially. It can just be making those conversations more routine and more normal. Starting a meeting with a bunch of people, instead of going straight into the agenda, doing a bit of a general check-in. How is everybody feeling today? How was your weekend? Is anybody tired? I'm pretty tired today. Or building it into your general strategy or your calendar of events throughout the year. So if you're an organisation that follows National Fitness Day or Smoking Cessation Day, have you thought about doing some support around World Mental Health Day? Let's have a bit of a focus on the different aspects of our mental health and normalise that. And ultimately, where we've seen mental well-being embedded really well in organisations and staff actively engaging in mental well-being support, it's come from organisations where they've empowered staff to have those conversations internally, to provide lots of different opportunities for discussions around mental well-being, or lots of different support options. So like we say, you can be an individual who might want to go and speak to a member of the management team and have a conversation about your mental well-being, or sit quite quietly in a toilet cubicle on your phone, accessing a bit of mental health support, and no one needs to know. Ultimately, it's about having those different areas and different opportunities to access support with your well-being, and you can achieve that in such a simple way. It doesn't need to be putting a lot of time and resource into mental well-being. It's just about starting to bring those general check-in conversations and general what support's out there for me into the day-to-day, whether that's in meetings, whether that's in internal communication, or whether that's just because you're chatting with someone over a coffee.
That's a brilliant answer to that question. I mean, and the reason I say trendy is because I worry that some organisations might go, right, we've got yoga on a Wednesday, done. And that's the tick box exercise that just sort of reduce what mental well-being really is. And you've hit the nail on the head there with, you actually need that choice. What's going to work with you? Is it talking to people? Is it going on your phone, on the toilet? And then that feeds into the culture of the organisation. So do you think that mental well-being is best provided for top down?
I think, again, it's dependent on the organisation. And like when we say organisational culture, like we said, it doesn't mean having this all singing, all dancing wellbeing culture where, we have yoga on a Monday, meditation on a Tuesday, everybody goes to drop-in sessions with a counsellor on a Thursday. It can just be looking at how staff engage. So do staff really engage with communication from our exec team? If a managing director sends an email out to the company, is that considered an absolute must read from the staff members? Engage with it, that's a real source of support for them. If that's the case, then leverage that. The fact that your organisation works in that way, you can use that to look after wellbeing. If you've got more of a flat hierarchy, a flat structure, and maybe there isn't an exec team, or you're a smaller business and actually it works more like in a family business kind of way, or much smaller teams, and the culture is more speaking to each other and actually staff engage more with managers or colleagues, then again draw on that, because if the support is there from peers, or support comes from the C-suite or the CEO, or support actually people really engage with the internal intranet or on Teams channels, or maybe you operate quite a lot through Slack or Facebook or WhatsApp, then that's where you're going to get the best take-up. So whether or not mental well-being should be provided from top down, it's absolutely going to depend on your organisation. It's more about thinking and asking yourself, how do our staff engage? What has worked previously? What hasn't worked? If we're asking everybody to complete a DSE assessment survey, would we send it out via our C-suite team, or would we send it out via a WhatsApp group link? Whatever works best and has worked best, that's what's going to be the in, really. So, is it best provided top down? I think it depends on your business, really. It depends on the kind of organisation you are.
Yeah, there'll be people listening to this, and I've saved this question towards the end because they might be thinking this the whole way through. But what would you say to people who are worried about stigma around mental health and mental health conditions within their organisation?
It's still a big thing, isn't it? If we say, for example, meditation's a really good example where there's a bit of stigma. We often think about meditation as being sat on the floor with your legs crossed, whereas actually meditation's been around for such a long time, and there's a lot of evidence behind how successful it is, because what it really is just being a bit more present in what you're doing. So meditation could be sat with a hot cup of coffee or a cup of tea, thinking about, oh, it smells great. Oh, it feels so nice and warm in my hands. I'm really enjoying just sitting here having a brew, actually. And that in itself is meditation. The buzzword mindfulness is thrown around a lot at the moment, but even just going for a walk with the dog around the block and thinking about, the weather's not great, or maybe it is great, or what's going to be around the next corner, or it's nice to just be out with the dog for a few minutes. Just the fact that, again, we're focusing on that particular activity gives us a lot of headspace, and we are actually practicing mindfulness. So a lot of the stigma around mental health comes from the language that we use. When we talk about mental health, the first thing people think of is a very clinical conversation, structured counselling or therapy where you might sit across the table from a therapist for an hour once a week. And to basically dig down and really manage stigma around mental health, we need to change what people think it is. If I say look after your physical health, people straight away don't think about being in the hospital with a cast on their leg. They might think about going for a walk, eating healthily, getting out on the bike. And it's the same with mental health. So those concerns around stigma really are better helped when we start changing the way we talk about mental health. So you're not doing a mental health check-in with someone when you're asking if they're okay. You're just thinking to yourself, oh, I'm just going to see how Leah is today, what she's been up to. And what you're doing there is prioritising Leah's mental health. It just becomes part of the conversation. So managing that stigma very much does start from how we ourselves start thinking about mental health. And if we can start changing how we associate mental health and when we bring those discussions in, and actually think of it more as looking after our sleep, having time away from stressors like work and family life, prioritizing life admin, like doing a bit of a financial check-in, getting the car booked in for an MOT, all these things that build up and actually cause us to feel a bit overwhelmed. This is all part of looking after our mental health. So the concerns around stigma are still very real, but it's going to start with changing how we talk about it. And it can be the same in organisations. We don't have to tell the workforce we're making a big push on mental health. It can just be a conversation with everybody to say, hey, just so you know, guys, there's support available there for you if you're struggling at home or you're struggling with your finances, or maybe you've got a 3-year-old that you just can't get off to sleep. There's support there for you. And straight away, we're starting to remove this stigma around mental health and just start normalising bringing it into the day-to-day.
You know what? That analogy of when you think of physical well-being, you don't think of someone being in a cast has actually blown my mind. That's such a good way to put it. It's such a good way to put it, because you don't think, if someone says physical well-being, in my head I get pictures of people outdoors going for a run, smiling. If somebody says mental well-being, for me, because I work in well-being, it's not so much, but I imagine people do think of that clinical, talking to a therapist type of thing, when actually, like you say, it doesn't need to be as bad as the analogy of a broken leg. So that's really interesting. I'm going to use that one and steal it.
Yeah, you're more than welcome to it. It's a good way, isn't it? Because even it's not even been that long that if we think about how long we've had workers, it's not been that long that we have been thinking of mental health, physical health in that way. So now it's just a case of, especially over the last 10 years and very much what we're doing now in 2021, changing how we talk about mental health. And it will come, like people won't, there won't be that stigma around mental health. Mental health doesn't have to be panic attacks, depression, suicidal thoughts, OCD. Mental health can be, I'm feeling a bit stressed and I'm going to do something about it. And that's you looking after your mental health. And there's loads of different ways you can do that.
Yeah, and I do think more organisations are more conducive to it these days. I mean, I know, for example, where I work, they wouldn't think twice about you taking your full lunch hour, because you're entitled to it, and going to the gym or going on a walk or something. And I really do think that is something that is changing. I hate to say it, we've gone on a bit of a tangent there. We've run out of time. But what I want to ask you is, there might be people listening to this thinking, these are some really good points. How on earth do I implement this into my own organisation? If they wanted to get in contact with you or Thrive, how would they get in contact?
It's really straightforward, actually. If anybody does want to get in contact, which we absolutely encourage you to do, like ultimately Thrive was founded because we want to provide support to you as an individual. You can just visit our website, so thrive.uk.com. Obviously, Leah, yourself and the team, as part of Open Money and the WorkLife project, have got a direct line into us. And if anybody wanted to speak to me themselves, my email's incredibly simple. I'm quite simply sarah@thrive.uk.com. We're also on Instagram and Twitter and so on. So if you wanted to hit us up on your socials, you can do. But yeah, we love having conversations around mental wellbeing because it can be quite straightforward and something that we just embed really easily and really enjoyable.
I love a bit of simplicity as well. Just Sarah@Thrive. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope all the listeners have really taken something away from there. I know I definitely have. Thank you so much, Sarah, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
No problem. It's been loads of fun, Leah. Thanks for having me on.
So Sarah believes that yes, it is the responsibility of organisations to provide for the mental health of its members. this encourages peer-to-peer support and is a big part of getting rid of the stigma around mental health issues. She believes that stigma will only become less of an issue if we normalise talking about our mental well-being, and that preventative measures are the way to go. Join me next week where I speak with colleague and head of people at Open Money, Claire Staines, about our immediate environment and how we can make it more conducive to our work. Thank you very much.